He initially started robbing gravestones from cemeteries and shaving the names off and then reselling them. I started to see bodies throughout Medellín.
Vives acostado al lado de un cuerpo, ves cómo matan a la gente, pruebas la carne humana, vives el terror.
Imagine being a teenager, posting a silly video online, never thinking it could cost you your life. But in the world of Mexican drug cartels, even the smallest slight can have deadly consequences. This is exactly what happened when a young social media star made a drunken joke about El Mencho, one of Mexico's most feared drug lords. The punishment? Death by firing squad in a crowded bar.
Familiar with this cartel, then you know that no one in their right minds would willingly betray this insane, violent criminal outfit.
Today, we're going to explore some of the most shocking stories of cartel revenge. From El Mencho to El Chapo, and all the way to Pablo Escobar, we'll see how these ruthless leaders deal with anyone they see as a traitor. Because, in the world of cartels, there's nothing worse than being a snitch. A teenager walks into a bar, excited to meet his fans. Little does he know, he's just hours away from a brutal death, all because of a drunken joke he made online. This is the story of how El Mencho, one of Mexico's most feared drug lords, deals with those who dare to disrespect him. But let's first talk a bit about Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes, better known as El Mencho. He's practically the definition of ruthless. He's been the head of the CJNG for a long time now, and he has quite the reputation for being incredibly violent, even by cartel standards. Now, El Mencho didn't start out as a big shot. He was born into a poor family of avocado farmers. But by the time he was 11, he figured out he could make serious money by smuggling drugs in avocado crates. And from there, he worked his way up. He went from being a small-time dealer to a law enforcement officer, and finally, to a drug lord. But here's the thing. He didn't join the police because he had a change of heart. He just wanted to learn how the military worked. Then, in 2009, El Mencho started his own cartel, the CJNG, and that's when things got really bad in Mexico. The CJNG isn't just any cartel. It's like a small army. They've got tanks, drones, and all sorts of heavy weapons. El Mencho built his empire by being incredibly cruel to anyone who crossed him. And when we say anyone, we mean anyone. Rival cartel members, police officers, politicians, regular people, even families of his enemies. When it came to El Mencho's wrath, nobody was safe.
Vives acostado al lado de un cuerpo, ves cómo matan a la gente, pruebas la carne humana, vives el terror.
This is what life is like for people who end up on El Mencho's bad side. It's hard to even imagine going through something like that, but perhaps the most shocking thing about El Mencho is how easily offended he gets. In his world, almost anything can count as betrayal, and the punishment is always way worse than the crime. Take the story of Juan Luis Lagunas Rosales, also known as El Pirata de Culiacán. Juan was just a teenager who got famous on social media for his wild partying and heavy drinking. He had over 1 million followers on Facebook and another 300,000 on Instagram. To a lot of people, it looked like he was living the dream.
At 17 years old, Juan Luis was the envy of every boy his age. He was famous, attended exclusive parties, and even had celebrity friends.
But Juan's life wasn't as great as it seemed. His dad left before he was born, and his mom felt so overwhelmed that she left him with his grandmother. Juan then dropped out of school when he was 15 and ran away to Culiacán. At first, Juan worked cleaning cars, but then he discovered alcohol, and things spiraled out of control. One day, someone filmed him drinking a whole bottle of vodka in one go. This video quickly went viral, and suddenly, Juan was famous. People started inviting Juan to parties, wanting to see how much he could drink. He'd chug down amounts that would shock even grown-ups who were used to drinking. Juan drew a mustache on his face and took pictures with fancy cars and naked women. But you could still see he was just a kid. It was sad. Really. People encouraged him to keep drinking because they thought it was funny. In late 2017, Juan was drunk yet again and decided to post a video of himself making jokes. One of those jokes was about El Mencho.
El Mencho a mí me pela la verga.
Now, most people wouldn't take a drunk teenager's video seriously, but El Mencho did. He was so angry about this joke that he decided right then and there that Juan had to die. Now, one thing about El Mencho is that he has a huge ego, and it doesn't take much for it to get bruised. Someone once had this to say about him: "This is a guy who'll execute your whole family based on not much more than a rumor." He just has zero regard for human life. On December 17, 2017, Juan posted on social media where he'd be that night. He invited his followers to meet him at one of his favorite bars in Jalisco. At 11 p.m., 4 armed men walked into the bar. They aimed at Juan's head and shot him at least 15 times. And when it was all over, Juan's face was so badly damaged that the police had to identify him by his tattoos. A bartender also died that night after getting hit by one of the bullets meant for Juan. El Mencho didn't care about any of this. He just wanted to send a message: don't mess with the CJNG. And if this is what he did over one drunken video, imagine what he does to people who really betray him. Juan's story was one of the tamer cautionary tales on this list, but let's talk about a man who actually thought he could outsmart El Mencho. A man who went from being El Mencho's right-hand man to his worst enemy. This is the story of El Cholo, and how his betrayal led to one of the most gruesome deaths in cartel history. El Cholo used to be El Mencho's friend and right-hand man. They worked together in another cartel before El Mencho started the CJNG. At first, they were a team, but El Mencho became more and more controlling. He didn't like it when El Cholo had his own ideas about how to run things. El Cholo got fed up and started doing his own thing without asking El Mencho first. When someone told El Mencho about this, El Cholo got really angry. But instead of apologizing, he killed the guy who snitched on him in broad daylight. That's when El Mencho declared war on El Cholo. El Cholo then left the CJNG and started his own cartel, called Nueva Plaza. He even teamed up with the Sinaloa cartel, the CJNG's biggest rival. Now, for a while, it looked like El Cholo could actually win. He knew all of El Mencho's tricks, so he could avoid his attacks and even win some battles. This war between El Mencho and El Cholo got so bad that 2017 was the deadliest year in Mexico's recent history, with over 31,000 people killed.
La niñez recordará esto como un tiempo de guerra. Tiene su ADN tatuado de balas y fusiles y sangre.
In March 2021, El Mencho's men finally caught El Cholo. They took him to a secret location and forced him to confess on camera. El Cholo had to praise the CJNG and say his own cartel was no good. He even said he had worked with a high-ranking police officer, which was a big deal. At the end of the video, El Cholo told his own men to give up and join the CJNG to save their lives. He knew what was coming next. El Mencho's men kept El Cholo alive for days, hurting him in ways that are too horrible to describe. Then, on March 18th, the police found El Cholo's body on a bench in Jalisco's tourist area. It was wrapped in plastic with 2 signs stuck to it with knives. One sign said, "The traitor, El Cholo." But here's where things get even more sinister. When the doctors examined El Cholo's body, they found that several of his organs were missing, including his eyes and tongue. It was El Mencho's way of sending a message. This is what happens to traitors. But El Mencho doesn't just go after his enemies. He threatens law enforcement agents too.
Mira bien, hijo de tu puta madre. Soy Mencho, güey. Relaja tu puta gente a la verga. Soy Mencho, güey. Relaja tus putas partidas, si no te voy a partir tu madre 10 todos tus bolas de perros. Te tengo identificado 30 güeyes. Hasta tus putos perros te voy a matar si no te relajas, güey.
This is how El Mencho treats the people put in charge to stop. He doesn't try to bribe them like some other drug lords. He just scares them so badly that even the thought of ever crossing him becomes unimaginable. And it's easy to see why nowadays. Hardly anyone ever does. Imagine being beaten for hours until your bones are broken, then thrown into a chicken coop to be tortured for days, only to end up being buried alive in the end. This was the fate of one unfortunate soul who crossed paths with El Chapo, another one of Mexico's most notorious drug lords. El Chapo ran the Sinaloa cartel, one of the biggest drug operations in the world, and he was finally caught in 2016 after escaping from prison twice. In 2017, El Chapo was sent to the United States to face charges for all the crimes he'd committed. He ended up getting life in prison plus 30 years. They sent him to ADX Florence, the highest security prison in the US. During El Chapo's trial, people learned just how cruel he could be. His former bodyguard, Isaias Valdez Rios, told some pretty scary stories about what El Chapo did to people who crossed him. They were completely like rag dolls. Their bones were totally broken. They could not move. And Joaquin was still hitting them with the branch and his weapon too. El Chapo beat these men for over 3 hours. He didn't just want to hurt them, he wanted to make them suffer for as long as possible. Another time, El Chapo got his hands on a guy from a rival cartel. His men had already hurt this person pretty badly. The bodyguard remembered. He had burns made with an iron on his back. His shirt was stuck to his skin. He had burns made with a car lighter all over his body. His feet were burned. But that wasn't enough for El Chapo. He kept this man in a big chicken coop for days, shooting at him and keeping him just barely alive to prolong his suffering. In the end, they buried the man alive. It's hard to even think about how much pain that person must have been in. El Chapo had other ways of scaring people too. Sometimes, he'd cut his enemies into pieces and leave them in ice chests all over town. In 2010, that's how the police found Hugo Hernandez, a member of a rival cartel. But El Chapo didn't stop there. Hernandez's face, sewn onto a football, was left in a plastic bag near City Hall. A note read, "Happy New Year, because this will be your last." El Chapo did things like this to scare not just other criminals, but law enforcement and government too. He wanted everyone to know how powerful he was and what would happen if they got in his way. Now, when it comes to El Chapo's sons, the branch really doesn't fall too far from the tree. They learned from their father and became just as cruel. In 2023, one of his oldest sons, Ovidio Guzman, was arrested. During his trial, people told some pretty horrible stories about what Ovidio and his brothers did. Ovidio and his brothers didn't just order other people to do these things, they did a lot of it themselves. For approximately 2 hours, members of the Ninis tortured Victim 5 by inserting a corkscrew into Victim 5's muscles, ripping it out of his muscles, and placing hot chilies in his open wounds and nose. Before being shot dead by Ivan Archivaldo Guzman Salazar, the indictment alleges, the victim and his fellow slain officer were then dumped near a motel off of a highway near the ranch. El Chapo taught his sons to be just like him. They got easily offended and wanted to destroy just about anyone who they thought had wronged them. Imagine being a pregnant woman, kidnapped, and forced to have an abortion just because your ex-boyfriend, a powerful drug lord, felt betrayed. This is just one of the shocking stories from the reign of Pablo Escobar, perhaps the most infamous drug lord in history. Pablo Escobar might have died years ago, but his name still strikes fear into the hearts of many. He was the king of cocaine, the richest criminal in history, and one of the most brutal men to ever walk the earth. Escobar's life was a twisted tale of ambition, power, as well as unimaginable cruelty. Born into poverty, Escobar's criminal career started small. As a teenager, he began with petty crimes.
He initially started robbing gravestones from cemeteries and shaving the names off and then reselling them.
But Escobar's ambition knew no bounds. He quickly moved on to more serious crimes like car theft, kidnapping, and even murder. And by the time he was 30, he had built a full-fledged criminal empire centered around the cocaine trade. Escobar's rise to power was marked by extreme violence and a willingness to eliminate anyone who stood in his way. In 1971, he and his cousin kidnapped Diego Echeverria, a wealthy businessman. They demanded a $50,000 ransom, which they received. But instead of releasing Echeverria, they killed him and dumped his body in a ditch. This early crime would set the tone for Escobar's future brutality. As Escobar's power grew, so did his paranoia, and ultimately, his cruelty. He developed a simple philosophy for dealing with obstacles, the famous saying, plata o plomo, meaning silver or lead. In other words, take the bribe or take a bullet. This approach allowed him to corrupt law enforcement and government officials across South America. And by 1980, Escobar was a billionaire with a lifestyle to match.
The ranch had 9 man-made lakes, water slides, life-size dinosaurs made out of fiberglass. We estimate that he easily spent, maybe about $10 million in constructing that ranch.
But beneath the surface of wealth and power, Escobar was a man consumed by fear and paranoia. He trusted no one, not even those closest to him. This paranoia led to some of his most shocking acts of cruelty. Take the story of his ex-girlfriend, journalist Virginia Vallejo. When Escobar discovered she was pregnant by another man, He felt betrayed, even though their relationship had ended. His response was horrifying. He had her kidnapped and forced her to get rid of her baby. The trauma she experienced was so severe that people said that she would feel physically sick just hearing Escobar's name for years to come. Even Escobar's own employees weren't safe from his wrath. Once, when he discovered that one of his household servants had stolen some silverware, he drowned the man in his pool, in front of several of his guests, no less. This public execution served as a warning to others about the consequences of crossing him. Escobar's paranoia even extended to his own family. He would blindfold his own children when moving between houses, not to protect them, but to ensure they couldn't reveal his whereabouts if captured and interrogated. His treatment of his workers was equally cruel. He changed bodyguards daily and used different people each time he needed to bury money. After they'd hidden the cash, he'd have them killed to ensure no one else knew the location. The effects of Escobar's reign of terror were visible throughout Medellin.
I started to see bodies throughout Medellin, and I would leave my house early in the morning and I would see cadavers on the side of the road.
Escobar's brutality wasn't limited to his personal enemies or employees. He was equally ruthless when it came to political opponents. In 1984, he had Justice Minister Rodrigo Lara assassinated for investigating his criminal activities. This killing crossed a line, prompting the Colombian government to work with the US to capture Escobar. But perhaps one of Escobar's most shocking acts was the infamous assassination of presidential candidate Luis Galan in 1989. Escobar's men killed Galen on stage during a campaign event, showing that no one was beyond his reach. Then, that same year, Escobar ordered the bombing of a plane in an attempt to kill another presidential candidate, Cesar Gaviria. Fortunately, however, Gaviria wasn't on the plane that day, but 110 innocent people lost their lives in this horrific act of terror. Even when Escobar was supposedly imprisoned in La Catedral, the luxury jail he built for himself as part of a deal with the Colombian government, his cruelty didn't stop. He personally tortured and killed 4 of his lieutenants over a money dispute. He also ordered the assassination of 2 cartel members from his prison phone. Escobar's final act of large-scale violence came on January 30th, 1993, when he tried to assassinate the head of Colombian security with a car bomb. He missed his target, but the results were devastating.
There were half bodies of children and people all over the street that were waiting for the school bus.
21 innocent people, many of them children, lost their lives in this senseless act of violence.
Pablo Escobar exploited poverty.
But he was doing that not for altruistic, but for very selfish reasons, to make sure that the people weren't selling him out, that they looked upon him as the Robin Hood, and he had places to go and hide then if necessary.
Escobar's life came to an end on December 2nd, 1993, just a day after his 44th birthday. Colombian authorities finally tracked him down to a safe house in Medellin, and in a final act of defiance, Escobar tried to escape over the rooftops, shooting at the police, but in the end, he was shot and killed. Still, the tragic reality is this: Pablo Escobar's legacy is one of fear, violence, and the brutal punishment of anyone he perceived as a threat or traitor. His life story serves as a reminder of the depths of human cruelty and the devastating consequences of unchecked power and ambition. While he may have lived like a king, Escobar's existence was ultimately one of paranoia and fear, a fitting end for a man who spread so much terror and pain throughout his life. We've journeyed through some of the darkest corners of the drug world, from El Mencho's ruthless revenge on a teenage prankster to El Chapo's horrific tortures and Pablo Escobar's reign of terror. These stories show just how dangerous and cruel the world of drug cartels can be, but it also raises a big question. Will this cycle of violence ever end, or are we seeing a never-ending war where each new drug lord tries to be more brutal than the last? Let us know what you think in the comments. And if you found this video eye-opening, don't forget to like and subscribe for more in-depth looks at the world's most dangerous cartels. Until next time, stay safe.